Hello everyone. I hope you're all doing fine. First of all, my apologies for not posting in a while. It has been very busy recently, so I didn't have the time to post any new videos. But I see that you're following, commenting, and liking my content, which I appreciate a lot. So I was thinking I view today a new video, and I want to talk about fair rules. So what are fair rules? Fair rules are a set of rules that apply to a specific fair, right? And these fair rules, they are built up on many different categories. It can be penalties or advanced purchase, maximum stay, minimum stay. We will look at all these categories. So let us first see how we can access the fair rules. Let's pull up an itinerary here. Okay, here we have now a booking from Frankfurt to JFK and back with Lufthansa in economy. And we want to read the fare rules connected to that fare. The ticket is issued and everything. How do we now get to the fare rules? So there are two ways, and I will show both of the ways with this example. So the first one is to reprice it basically with all the parameters that we know about the booking. And before we do that, we have to find out some things. The first thing we need to find out is when was the ticket issued. You can type the TWD command to see the ticket image. And you can see here that it is actually issued on the 9th of September. Okay, now we know that. We also need to know what kind of fare is it, the fare type. We open up our TST by typing TQT. And up here in the first row, you see the so-called fare indicator, which is the letter I and the number 0. And this tells us that this is a published fare. And something that is also good to know is what fare family is it that is booked, if applicable. Not all airlines have fare families, but Lufthansa has. And you can see here that the pricing command that has been used is actually done with the name of the fare family. So that is pretty convenient. So we can tell now, okay, this is booked with EcoSaver. If this is not the case, then you can pull up the TST history by typing TTH. And even though that this TST is active, we can still read the history of it. So on these lines, you see that it's both ways EcoSaver. It has been used to price the booking. So now we know the date of issue, we know the fare type, and we know the fare family. So in order to access the fare rules now, we can use the pricing command FXX, which let us look at the fare itself. So informative pricing, it doesn't, of course, create any TST or something. It's just that we have a look at the price. So, but we don't want to just look at any fares, of course. We want to look at the fare that is actually booked. So we look at the correct fare rules, because it's very important that we always look at the correct fare rules. Imagine you have a customer who wants to rebook the flight and you're looking at the wrong fare rules, and you tell the customer that it doesn't cost anything, no penalty fee to change the booking, but it does because you have been looking at the wrong fare rules. Or you tell the customer it's refundable, although it isn't. So if you tell the customer something wrong, the customer will be very dissatisfied, and also you might get an ADM from the airline if you action on the wrong fare rules. So we need to type FXX, which lets us look at the price as it is booked, means in kilo and tango class. Type /r comma, and this part is always the same. /r comma. Then we need to specify the date of issue, 9th of September 24, because we want to look at the fare, how it was that day that the ticket was issued. Since it's a published fare, we will also type the letter P for published. We do another slash, and we can add the fare family to it, FF-EcoSaver. We hit enter, and we see the pricing image here. What we can do now to compare is that we can split our screen in Amadeus, and we look at our TST. And as you can see, it is all the same. The name of the fare basis is correct both ways. The price is also correct. You see, fare basis 284 euros. Then with taxes 750.97. So this is all correct. So we can tell that we are now looking at the correct fare. So this is of course only the pricing image and not the fare rules. If we now want to look at the fare rules, we type FQN 01. And that leads us probably to another picture where we gotta specify the fare component, I think. Exactly. Since there are two fare components, we have to look at each way. So if we only want to see the chapters, we type FQN 1-1 to look at the first fare component, which means the outbound flight. And now we have a page here, an image with a lot of different categories. And we will look at it later, how to access these. For now, I only want to show you how to get there. Because in the end, the picture will be the same. It's just the way how to get there is different. Likewise, if we type 1-2, we will come to the return. You see here, fare component to New York City to Frankfurt. So this is our return flight. If you would not build up your comment exactly like this, let's say, for example, you don't type this, then if you don't use the fare family option here, you would get different fares here, you see. On line number 1, you have a mix between EcoFlex and EcoSaver. Line number 2, you have our actual fare that is booked, the correct one. And on line number 3, you have the EcoLight. So here you still need to check, okay, which one is it that I want to look at. That's why it is good to use as many options as you can in your repricing comment, so there is no confusion. Okay? All right. And of course, this command requires, of course, that you have an existing booking. Otherwise, it will not be possible to use that command. And also very important that this command works only for completely unflown itineraries. If now, for example, the outbound flight here would be flown, then you cannot use that command, right? Because what it does is that it reprices your booking as it is with all the conditions that have been initially used. And when one of the flights used, or so then it doesn't work. Then you gotta use another command. So the other way to access the fares is the FQD command. FQD, fare quote display. And you can also choose that, and this is also a way to use if you don't have any existing booking. So here we use it like this. We type FQD, then we use our city pair, so Frankfurt to New York City. You can also type JFK, that doesn't really matter. So we can type JFK here. So this part must always be like this. Then you gotta specify the day, and it's 12th November, right? 12th November, we use the actual day of the departure. Do another slash. We know the airline, it's Lufthansa. We know the booking class, it's Kilo class. So this is how we specify the airline. You type A for airline, basically, A for airline, then the airline code afterwards. Likewise with the booking class, you type C for booking class and K, you see up here, it's K, Kilo class, and you type K, Kilo class here. Then you go to our options here, R, comma, and exactly the same as before, 9 September 24, and we want to look at published fares. So then I use something called IL, and this is optional, you don't have to use it, but what it does is it ignores the carrier list. Normally when you use that command, it would show you first a list of all carriers on that route, but we don't want to see that because we know that it's Lufthansa, we know what we want to look at, so I type this IL, which stands for ignore list. So as I said, it's optional, you don't have to use it, but it's more convenient because we want to look at the fare bases at the fare code display or not any carrier list. IL, and I can also type FF. What does FF do? FF sorts the listing by fare families, which comes in pretty handy. It's also optional, but it makes the whole thing a little more user friendly because you see directly what you are looking at. So FQD for fare code display, city pair afterwards, then the day of departure, airline, booking class, these options here, and the issue date, publish fares, ignore the list and sort by fare families. We hit enter and we get our fare quote display. Okay, so what is now the right fare to look at? This is pretty easy to tell. We remember it's EcoSaver. That's the one we gotta look at. And this is also a proof, by the way, that the booking code, for example, K class, can be actually more than one fare family. You can book K class in Flex, and you can Eco Base and Eco Saver. So that's completely possible. Okay, so we can split our screen again and compare the fare bases. This is the name of the fare basis. And as you can see, we can see it here also. And it's also EcoSaver, which indicates that we are on the right place here. And you remember from before, how do we access the fare rules? Exactly the same as before, FQN, but we must of course use the correct line number because we want to look at line number 2, means we type 2. And now we don't need to do 2-2 or 2-1 because we're only looking at the outbound flight right now. And here we have our different chapters, right? And we will talk about them shortly. Let's go back to our itinerary because now we looked up only the outbound flight. Sometimes the fare rules from the inbound flight can be different from the one from the outbound flight. And sometimes also the penalties or whatever, the fare rules apply per fare component, which means that we must read both ways to make sure that we are doing the right thing. And how do we check now the return? Basically exactly the same way as before, but we must change accordingly. You type FQD, and we still type Frankfurt to JFK. We don't type JFK to Frankfurt now, because our fare originates in Area 2 in Germany, in Europe, not in the US. That's why we are not allowed to turn the city pair around here. Although we are looking for the return, but we still need to type Frankfurt to JFK because our complete fare here originates in Germany, and these are return fares, right? So that's why we must still type Frankfurt to JFK. On the 27th November, and with Lufthansa in the booking class Tango, ignore list and sort by fare families. Oh, sorry, I forgot something. Can you tell what I forgot? Yes, of course. The date of issue here. So, all right. So let's have a look. And once again, if we compare with our TST, we check now the fare basis of the return flight. This is this one here, and we can find it here. And it's once again line number 2. You see also that it's EcoSaver. So we type our FQN command with the right line number, and then we get to our, like you can say, front page of the fare rules. And you can see these here like as chapters. Okay, so now we know how to access the fare rules. So let's now see how to actually read them. So let's now have a look at the different categories in the fare rules. And we will not look at like all of them. As I mentioned before, some of them might be more important to you than others, depending on your role also, what you're working with. So let's put up our pricing image with the command that I have been using before. So, and then okay. So now that we have our pricing image here, we will look at the fare rules. Remember, we type FQN 1-1 because we have to look at each fare component individually if we only want to look at the categories. If we would want to jump directly to a category like penalty, for example, then we don't need to type 1-1. But I want to take the extra step now and show you how to get to the first page first here. So here we have now our front page, you can say, and then from here we can access the different categories. So let's have a look at, for example, the max stay chapter. This tells us how long this is actually valid, the fare. So we type FQN01 or only one, that's up to you, star, and then MX for max stay. You see here that the abbreviation here tells us MX, so we use the same here. You can also type 2 slashes, that's the same. I prefer to use the star. Okay, so up here we have always some information about the fare itself. We know that it's for adult, it's the first fare component between Frankfurt and New York City. We have the fare basis code here, and also we have the fare family. Okay, the max stay now for the round trip fare that it is. It tells us that travel from last stopover must commence no later than 12 months after departure from fare origin. So that means that since the outbound flight is on the 12th November, so let's say our customer travels from Frankfurt to New York on the 12th November, and then he rebooks the return flight, and again, like extends the stay, postpones the return, and so on and so on, then he can do so, but not until like after the next 12th November next year, because then you would have exceeded that 12 month. So, and this is pretty common restriction when it comes to maximum stay. Others than really unrestricted fares, like they are not really restricted, but the most common that you probably meet is that one here, that it should be not later than 12 months. So let's have also a look at the, for example, minimum stay. Minimum stay, we type MN for minimum stay. And this says travel from turnaround must commence no earlier than 6 days after arrival at turnaround. So what does that tell us? And this is also a pretty common restriction for minimum stay, especially long haul, like from Europe to the US or something. That means the customer travels now on the 12th of November, which is a Tuesday, and arrives also at the same day in the US, and the turnaround must commence no earlier than 6 days after arrival. Let us have a look just to make sure. Exactly 20, which is 15 days later, so there's no problem. But let's say now our customer he arrives in New York on the 12th of November, and then there's some emergency, so he must go home already after 3 days, on the 15th, for example. Then this fare would not be valid anymore. The EcoSaver fare will not be valid. So our ticket changer, if we try to rebook, would give us a higher fare because this fare is restricted. So 12th November, 6 days later, should be not before the 18th November, he can fly back. That's what it means. And since both the fare components are in the same fare family, I'm pretty sure that this applies also for the return flight. Exactly. Let us now have a look at the advanced reservation ticketing. What does it tell us here? So, it says now here, for example, that reservation for all sectors are required at least 10 days before departure. And when reservations are made at least 72 hours before departure, ticketing must be completed within 72 hours after reservations are made, or at least 10 days before departure, whichever is earlier. So here means also that we have some kind of restriction from when we can actually purchase the ticket. So you cannot, for example, purchase the ticket too close to the departure. There must be some time between reservation and purchase and departure, so that this fare would actually be applied. And that's why we see sometimes that when people making like last minute booking, that they have only higher fares because of this advanced purchase restrictions here. So now to the most important, I think, if you are working like as a reservation agent, travel consultant, whatever, I think the penalty section should be a very important one, because often customer calls to change a booking or to refund or whatever. So let's have a look at the penalty section. Okay, what can we read from here? We can read that the ticket is actually not refundable. Means if the passenger now cancels the ticket, the money will not be refunded except for some taxes. And even this is mentioned here in the fare rules. I think on page number 3. Yeah, refund of unused taxes paid to third parties permitted. So, except for taxes that are legally non-refundable. We have the YR tax is basically never refundable, almost never. It's some kind of fuel surcharge. And Lufthansa also doesn't refund any YQ tax, which is their distribution cost for being in a GDS like Amadeus, for example. Even if the fare would be fully refundable, they would not give you that back. And the rest could be refundable. So, but the ticket itself is not refundable at all. And that's the same for the whole EcoSaver fare family. Let's look at the changes. So, change the ticket is possible if you pay €150 penalty for reissue or revalidation. So you are allowed to actually change your ticket. And Lufthansa also defines here what is a change for them. A change is like a date or a flight or routing or booking code change. So you can change the flight to another day, also to another routing, although, watch out, rerouting is only permitted if origin and destination of the fare component remain the same. That means that it must still go between Frankfurt and New York City. But let's say you can add another stopover to it. The fare rules actually allow that. You could see that. Oh, I didn't show it to you, but it was actually in the fare rules. You could add another stopover, like, a connection point, but the route must still be between Frankfurt and New York City. Otherwise, it's not allowed. You cannot change to another city or another destination or from another origin. That's not allowed. The rules for the change apply by fare component or direction, and in case of fare combination, charge the highest fee of all changed fare components. And this is something that is very common. If you, for example, change only the outbound flight for 150, cost you €150. But let's say, for example, the return flight would be another fare family and it has a lower penalty fee, like let's say €60. If you change everything, outbound and in-flight, it would be still outbound and inbound, it would be still €150 because it's the highest fee that should be charged. If you change only the return, and the return would be, for example, €60, then you pay €60. But in our case, we know that it's the same fare family. That's why the return flight is also €150 penalty. But if you change outbound and inbound, let's say you postpone the whole flight to a week later, for example, then you pay €150. And let me just also say something about the refund. I forgot, sorry, because that's also very important. Let me just find it. We jump back to the refund section, sorry. Because this is something here that is very interesting and something that is also typical for Lufthansa, or there are some airlines who have that system, that they say that when combining non-refundable fares with refundable fares, the most restrictive cancellation condition applies to the entire pricing unit. That means that if now we know that the outbound portion is non-refundable, but let's say we would have a flex fare on the return flight, if we don't have, but let's say if, with a penalty or no penalty, it would be refundable somehow. But since our outbound is non-refundable, everything becomes refundable, no matter the flexibility on the other fare component. Okay, and this is something that is typical for Lufthansa, that if something is not refundable, the whole ticket becomes basically non-refundable, because the refund rules applies per pricing unit, and that means per ticket, you can say, not per fare component. Okay, that is something I wanted to mention because it's important. It is always important that we understand the fare rules correct. And this is now only an example. The airlines, it's up to the airlines, how do they express themselves here. This is not like a standard text that is the same for all airlines. But you can read from the fare rules that what they mean. Change fee applies for every single closed reissue, revalidation, or rebooking transaction. That means that it doesn't matter if you change both ways or only one way. There is one penalty fee that is applied. There are some airlines that also have it per fare component, and you must apply it per direction. In that case, it would be if the outbound is €150 and the inbound is €150, you would pay €300 for the rebooking, if it's so. But in our case, it's not the case. It would be one penalty fee for the changes that you make. No-show is not permitted. It means if you are a no-show on your flight, then probably Lufthansa will cancel your flight completely, but you are not allowed to make any changes afterwards. And here we come to a section that is also important. And here it depends on what you want to change. So that basically means if changes are made to any other than the first ticketed flight coupon, the fares in effect at the time of original ticket issue will apply, provided the new itinerary qualifies for all the provisions of the originally ticketed booking code. Fare ignoring advance reservation or ticketing requirements. So there's a long text, but what it basically means here is that if you, for example, only change the return flight, not the outbound, but only the return flight, then you must use the fare that was in effect on the date of the ticket when the ticket was issued. Yeah, because the fares can have been changed, right? Let's say in 1 month the fares can be different, but you must use the historical fares. But if the changes are made to the first ticketed flight, and now I scroll down, and the ticket is completely unused, the fares in effect at time of rebooking or reissue will apply. So that means that if you make changes to the first fare component, if you are making change to the first fare component, meaning the outbound flight, then you use today's fares, or that the day when you want to make the reissue. So if you change inbound, means historical fare. If you change outbound or altogether, then it is the today's fare that you gotta use. If you use Amadeus Ticket Changer, of course, it does it for you. You don't really need to think about it. But if you need to do a manual reissue, then it's important to know it. So, and this is not general either for all airlines. You gotta read the fare rules to know what is the case. And also important, when changes are made and the original ticketed booking class are kept, the new fare may be lower, equal, or higher. So it means if the kilo class is available on your new flight, and the fare can be then lower or higher or equal. This is okay, but if it's lower and you have any residual amount, means like from the change you will get suddenly a residual amount, meaning you should normally get money back because the new fare was lower. This will actually be ignored, means you will not get anything back. If the kilo class that we had in our outbound is not available, you must use a higher booking class. Then the new fare may only be equal or higher, so it's not allowed to be lower. And if it's applicable, collect the change fee and charge the fare difference to the higher fare. This means that when you are making a change and the fare is higher, you must charge the penalty and a fare difference. And this is something that some customers don't understand. They think that it's only the penalty fee, but they don't see that the fare also can be different. So the actual change can be more than only the €150 penalty fee because of the fare difference. And the reissue and EMD issuance, because the penalty fee will be charged on EMD in this case, must be made within 24 hours after change. So you are not allowed to, make the change and then just don't reissue the ticket right away. So you should do everything in one workflow, you can say. And then this was the end of the change rules, and then we go to the second fare component here, as you see here, second fare component. And since they are the same fare family, you can see that they are exactly the same conditions. I think I might make maybe another video maybe where I talk a little more about different scenarios of fare rules. Also what kind of scenarios you can meet, ways how the airlines actually express themselves sometimes, and what kind of cases you would get. If you're interested in this, please let me know in the comments if you want me to make a video dedicated only on more, like you can say, deep diving in the reading of the fare rules. So thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.